I don't have a rant to give you today. That there's something wrong that needs to be righted. That there's something stupid that the world is doing. And if we just do it the right way, things will be so much better. And I have to tell you, there's nothing better that can be done because the games industry is dead. Now, when I say dead, I don't mean totally, completely dead. I mean nearly brain dead. I mean, the heart's still pumping, the lungs are still moving, product is going out the door, money's coming in, people getting hired and fired. But when you look at it in terms of, you know, what's up here, there isn't anything up here. There's no creativity. There's no thought for creativity. There's no creative life in this industry at all. It's just a dead creature that just keeps pumping. And, you know, we put food in, shit comes out. And that's about all it does. So it's kind of like, I mean, think about it. Electronic Arts really isn't very different from Procter & Gamble. They put soap suds in a box, they put game in a box, they sell the box, they put a little thing that says new and improved on it. That's about all they ever do. So, I mean, in many ways, we're kind of like this panel is like a group of doctors standing around the bed of a brain-dead patient, all talking about what we can do to restore her to life and vivacity. And I'm here to say, I'm sorry, there's just green goo inside the skull, and you know, this is a waste of time. There's nothing that can be done. She's dead, Jim.
I've been an avid gamer since my parents purchased my first Atari on my 10th birthday. And I spent many days enjoying all the classics like Combat, Space Invaders, and one of the best games ever made for the 2600, Pitfall. No longer are we in an age of black and white blips and beeps of a Pong era. If you look back, it's hard to imagine how far the technology has progressed in such a short amount of time.
Fires this one over the middle, and it's caught for a touchdown.
Gamer is going gaga.
I never thought of myself as a true hardcore gamer. You know, I wasn't exactly lining up to purchase a next generation console, but I did spend a lot of time and a lot of quarters in the arcade. It's pretty embarrassing when my only vice is wasting time. Ex-girlfriends would always tell me to grow up. They could never grasp the fact that I was really trying to get to the next level. Just not with them. Of course, like anything, the video game has had its ups and downs, and it was no easy road to the multi-billion-dollar industry it is today.
An arcade game called Death Race caused quite an uproar. Good old-fashioned fun, no blood and violence.
Are you saying that Devin Moore shot 3 people in the head because of a video game?
He was given a murder simulator.
A friend once said to me, "Dylan, video games without violence is like porn without sex." Look at most of the top-selling games today. You're either shooting, kicking, punching, crashing, or blowing something up. People have always thought of the video game as a child's toy. Have a look around the office, the neighborhood pub, or even on the bus. I guarantee you will see a grown adult playing a game on the mobile phone, killing time on the commute to work. Today's companies like Sony and Microsoft have stepped it up, and it's big business. and a lot of people are making a lot of money. But in a corporate world, it's not all fun and games.
My fiance had gotten a job with them and went to work up in EALA. The day after he started, they went into crunch. And they called it a pre-crunch. It was, the producer had pitched it as, we're gonna crunch now so that we can not crunch later.
It is a valid type of retaliation. I mean, this is not a problem unique to EA. I mean, these are issues that are endemic to the entire industry. But I mean, if something like that were to hit, and EA or Vivendi or whoever it is, the targets of these class action suits, I mean, these could be multi-million-dollar payouts. I mean, in the hundreds of millions. Bottom line, if one of these companies have to pay out like a $500 million settlement, all of a sudden, it's bad business.
The interesting thing about the Fair Labor Standards Act is, I think a lot of people presume that if somebody's on a salary, they're not entitled to overtime. That's clearly a misinterpretation of the law. I did want to point out something about the class action suits that are currently pending against EA, because it is the elephant in the room. These were filed by a law firm that specializes in large class action suits. I think you have actually, the complaints are already posted on our site, aren't they? Yeah. But these were filed under the California statute. One of the things, a couple of things I want to mention. Number one, this is not a situation where you have a giant company that has unlimited sources to litigate and a small individual who's litigating against them. This class action law firms this particular firm takes down giants for a living. 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 Giants for a living.
The neat thing was, when you were a programmer back in those days, it was so easy to impress people. I remember when I started working on this game called the Atarians, which was a first pinball game for Atari, and the guy who quit, the guy who I replaced, who was the former programmer, had told everyone it was impossible to blink a light.
In the 60s, there was no such thing as a video game. That didn't really come out until 1971 with the Odyssey home game system, and then also in 71 is when Atari started with the arcade games like Pong, and going on later with Breakout and all of those. Together with the arcade game and with the Odyssey, people started to get it, and then people wanted it, and then it became huge. People wanted this in their homes. Both of those systems, the arcade machines back then and the home systems, they both lacked something. They didn't have computers. They weren't microprocessors. You built a video game in hardware. The Odyssey, the early Pong games, breakout games, they were all hardware, NAND gates, OR gates, op amps, you know, all wired together. A company in Japan, I think it was Taito, was the first one to put a microprocessor into an arcade machine. And that then really changed the whole industry overnight.
I thought video games sucked because they were so shallow, there was so little gameplay. You know, it was just some guy shooting a cactus or something.
Invaders! Possibly from space!
People of Earth, I am Lur of the planet Nintendo 64. Tremble in fear at our 3 different kinds of ship.
When the game Space Invaders came along, I think that showed first artificially intelligent, or maybe artificially stupid enemies.
We're losing ships, Lur. What are your orders?
Increase speed, drop down, and reverse direction.
Space Invaders kind of defined kind of the genre of video games, of the modern video game, and that once I saw that game, I go, man, this is cool. I gotta get into it.
It's Saturday night. I have no date. A 2-liter bottle of Shasta and my all-rush mixtape. Let's rock.
That then really changed the whole industry overnight because it became, you programmed a game and you could make game cartridges that would plug into things. And that's what allowed in 75, I guess it was, or 76, for Atari to introduce the 2600. Because now you had a microprocessor and it was a computer, you could actually program for it. And that was the next big step, was the Atari 2600. And the problem there was, it wasn't quite as popular.
The Atari 2600 only had 128 bytes of RAM. You'll notice that I didn't say K. .128 bytes of RAM. That machine couldn't do anything really other than Pong. And there was a huge amount of hubris at Atari and at Activision, which was the one renegade company that decided to make software for the Atari without permission from Atari. So those are the guys that believe that, wow, this machine's going to last forever and everyone's going to get one and they're going to buy new games for it every year and we're just going to keep proliferating these things even though essentially they're all Pong.
The thing that at the time, which is now well recognized, but wasn't well recognized at the time, was it's not the hardware that sells, it's what people want to do with it that sells, the killer app. And that's still to this day. You look at Sega Dreamcasts, everyone said the Sega Dreamcast, what a wonderful machine, but what do you play on it? And for a long time, they were saying the same thing about the Xbox.
They call it Halo.
And it's finally Halo that got people saying, okay, this is what we have to buy an Xbox for.
Contains the map room. We're approaching the LZ. It's gonna be hot. Get set to cut out quick. Touchdown! Hit it, Marines! Go, go, go!
They were going to shut down the 2600 and concentrate just on arcade games, but they still had some stuff to release, and one of the things they released was Space Invaders for the home unit. And it turned out everybody loved Space Invaders in the arcade, and everybody wanted to play Space Invaders at home. And as soon as Space Invaders was released for the 2600, the sales went through the roof. It was that killer app. It was so Space Invaders. Space Invaders is what really, at that point, moved the 2600s out the door. In television, the strength for us were the sports games. It was a brilliant marketing move because when the Atari 2600 came out, you know, they had all their little sports games on it. When we came out on the television, we had better graphics. And so, again, people at that time still weren't exactly sure what a video game was. But they did the commercials. They got sports writer George Plimpton to come out and show an Atari and an Intellivision.
Here's an easy question for you. Which of these games is the closest thing to the real thing? A, Intellivision Major League Baseball. B, Atari Baseball. If you thought A, Intellivision, you're absolutely correct. You see, I told you this question was easy.
And the newspaper started covering it because newspapers, the media loved to cover a war. Apple versus PC, Nintendo versus Sega, PlayStation versus Xbox. The newspapers, Time Magazine, all these places started covering Atari versus Mattel. Now, the part that killed us was that 2 years later, Coleco comes out with the ColecoVision, and they have better graphics. But they could license Donkey Kong, and their Donkey Kong looked like the real arcade game Donkey Kong. They went on a spending spree and got the rights to all of these very famous arcade machines at the time. Anything that Atari pretty much didn't have the rights to. (1982), Atari, Intellivision. Somebody like Activision comes along and makes a game for the Atari 2600, makes it for the Intellivision. Mattel didn't get any money off that. Atari didn't get any money off of that. Anybody with a computer and a ROM burner could make games for these systems. And they did. Everywhere you looked, there was another company that was doing Atari 2600 games, of which Atari was not going to see a penny.
I never really understood why the Atari 2600 was as successful as it was, given the limitations of the device. No, I buy into the basic industry analysis, which is it was a result of too much shit product being shipped too quickly.
You know, I mean, personally, I thought it was over. I thought, you know, video game was like, I don't know if you're back in the 70s, there was this thing called the pet rock, the hula hoop, you know, breakdancing, grunge era, you know, everybody went crazy. Or it was like disco, you know, it's just like, it was like everybody did it, then it was like over.
I didn't want to support that platform at all because I thought, well, that's really is a hula hoop. It's not going to last. And sure enough, it not only caused Atari to crash with that kind of thinking, but it took Activision down with it.
People had just been so immersed. It was actually kind of like the .com bust. It was just, that was it. It was like, okay, on to real life. You know, we did video games. Now we're going to go get a real job at the gas station, you know, pumping gas instead of designing driving simulators, you know.
So a lot of these games, they paid a fortune for the license and then rushed the game to market. And so people said, oh boy, the E.T. game. And they rushed out and bought it and plugged it in and they go, that's it?
From Atari, made especially for systems from Atari. The video game that lets you help E.T. get home. Just in time for Christmas. Happy holidays from Atari.
No one had ever done a game in less than about 5 months. I mean, no one had ever done a game in 5 weeks. It just didn't happen. And so he told them, forget it, you know, you just can't do it. And after that, they called me. If I would have had another 5 days, I would have changed a number of things in the game. But the game fundamentally, as it was a full game, it had good graphics, it was totally playable, you know. I did the game, I take the consequences, And there's a part of me that does sort of thrill over the idea that, you know, I toppled the industry. You know, I would prefer it to be the worst. If it's going to be bad, I'd like it to be the worst. People say they have satellite photos. I've still never seen any proof positive of this whatsoever.
And Electronic Arts was born into the vacuum that followed that, which was, you know, the early 1980s, where basically there was all of this negative publicity about the collapse of Atari, and therefore the video game is just a hula hoop. It's gone. It's over, and sort of a bad taste in the public's mouth. So Electronic Arts was having to go up this steep hill trying to convince people that it's something they should care about. So while we're chipping away at that as a small company, this new company comes along in 1985 called Nintendo.
They knew exactly why the crash had happened, and it was this whole problem with the glut and everything. And so Nintendo, when they came back, really kept control of everything.
They introduced a completely new and radical business model that survives to this day. They were the ones that basically invented the idea that it's going to be a closed proprietary platform, and if you want to make software for it, make games for it, you're going to have to sign a license agreement, and then you're going to have to conform to all their rules.
And they had real control. They said, okay, you want a baseball game? We already got a baseball game. No baseball games. And how many do you want to do? You want to do 300,000? That's going to be too many. 200,000. You can do 200,000.
You can't make more than 5 games a year. You have to let us manufacture them for you. We're going to charge you a huge fee for that. Sometimes it might take us 6 to 12 months to deliver your inventory, so you might go out of business while you're waiting for us to supply you. You're going to have to pay us in advance. Oh, and then by the way, there's going to be this huge per unit fee.
They didn't want to go through what the industry had gone through before in 1983.
So you can see why there are a lot of people that thought, yeah, gee, I'm not really rooting for them. You know, the whole industry did not want that to be the way it was going to go.
Today, you have a system where if you want to develop a game for the PlayStation 2, you have to call up Sony, get a license to be an official developer, and then you have to say, here's my game idea. And they have to say, that doesn't look too bad. And then you have to program the game, and then you have to give them the finished game, and then they have to test it, make sure there's no bugs in it. And then they say, okay, fine, you can sell this game now. Then you have to pay them to manufacture the discs. The people who make the hardware make enough money, so there's the hardware support. The third-party developers, Electronic Arts, they're making their money. I think everybody's happy with where it is right now. If you wanted to go technically about restraint of trade and monopolies and all this, you could probably break it all apart, but I don't think anybody wants to.
But it's just as part of the price of a pixel, man. You know, it's a tough racket today, but you know, there's still that magic, that dream of working on a hit, of doing, you know, coming up with that next Tetris or the next Pong or, you know, or whatever.
Doom was like a grassroots phenomenon that just went all over the place. And at one point, I think Bill Gates had said that there were more copies of Doom on PCs than Windows were on PCs back then. Was like crazy. You know, we'd made insane money and lifestyle changes and everything.
The first project we did was a game called Earthworm Jim, and that game really got us on the map. You know, it became a toy line, a TV show. We got, you know, bedspreads, lunch boxes, underpants, everything you could possibly get from a video game.
And the Game Developer's Choice Award for New Studio goes to... Crytek, developers of Far Cry.
You only need to do one good game, and you'll be in the awards ceremony in there with thousands of people applauding you, and people will be coming up asking to buy your company and offering you millions of dollars.
And there's companies that are on the verge of bankruptcy, and then they have a hit, and boom, they're flying high. One hit can do it in games.
You know, I think they're obviously a very successful organization. They have given people what they wanted. They understand what motivates consumers, what brands they want to buy. They've, you know, bought up, you know, James Bond, you know, you name it. They you know, Tiger Woods, whatever, you know. So I think, you know, they're a very, very astute company. Done really a tremendous job.
Electronic Arts, you know, is, you know, the 500-pound gorilla in the video game industry. There's no question about it.
EA has done some creative things. I mean, they did release The Sims, even though they did try to kill it several times before it finally got out the door.
Today, the EA Sports comprises a very high percentage of the revenue of Electronic Arts, and therefore a high percentage of the value of the company. So you might argue that EA Sports as a brand today has a value of something like $10 billion.
Sports games are great for EA because all you really have to do is update the player stats and make some kind of incremental improvement in the graphics from year to year. And people buy the new game just because. So it's very easy to plan for the development of those games. It's controllable, and your sales are predictable. EA wishes all games work that way. And unfortunately, all games don't work that way.
You know, I guess for EA, that's good business. You know, I think for the gaming public, probably not so good, because you don't have competition. You don't have the, you know, the one-upsmanship. The, you know, keeps everybody honest. So, but I think really, you know, I think it may lead EA to kind of lose some of their creativity.
Yeah, the Criterion purchase was pretty interesting. Super brilliant move on EA's part. So many companies using renderware, and of course, you know, when you're using renderware, then EA is going to know what you're doing. So no one wants that.
Before starting Electronic Arts, I had been waiting for the big idea. I felt that I had to have a really strong anchor idea that was going to give the company a reason for existence, and the idea became the software artist. The notion that for the first time I could think of, and the world could think of software as an art form. Instead of it being an engineering discipline, instead of it being something purely for the business market, that it could be something for entertainment and recreation and be a form of artistic expression.
Back in the early 80s, when you made a game, you made a game. It was like nobody else. You did the graphics, you did the sound, you did all the programming, you probably did your own packaging and instructions and everything. And it was awesome. You created this one thing. It was like someone who's a painter, they make an entire painting themselves.
You would be doing all the testing for it, you would be the one selling it to a company, you would be the one, you know, making sure the check comes in the mail. You're the business guy, you're everything. And that was really fun back in those days, because, you know, it was like Eugene Jarvis, who just got the Lifetime Achievement Award. He was there in those days, and he said when he needed to have a meeting, he just had it in his mind, because everyone's there, right? The whole team is sitting in that one chair. And those days are so far gone, it's not funny.
Freedom, the creative freedom that you had, and the kind of in that era, it was like the ambition of a designer was to do something completely new.
Playing games in the arcade, I think that there was a lot more unexplored territory in terms of what you could do with 2D sprites. In that sense, there was a lot of innovation going on in terms of gameplay in games that were being made during the 80s.
It's like, okay, I'm gonna do the first ever basketball game. You know, nobody had ever done a video basketball game. You know, the first ever video football game, the first ever car racing game, the first, you know, it was just, there were so many things that just had never been done.
You had very little technology to work with. A good designer had to accept what those constraints were and try to figure out, well, what's the most fun thing that we can do within this set of constraints.
Because there were very few precedents, the creators of the games were in some cases inventing whole new genres with the release of a new arcade game or console game or computer game.
It took about 3 months to develop a game. The way it worked with marketing was marketing had certain ideas of what they wanted. They wanted the sports games, they wanted the sports titles, and so they'd made a list of sports titles. And so if you were interested in sports, you kind of look at the list and say, as Mike Minkoff did, hey, bowling, bowling, let's do the bowling game.
It was a very creative, experimental situation. And I guess the employees were also very experimental in, you know, in substances. And I really think, I think back, and if people hadn't been so high, I just think of how many more things could have been done. I don't know, would the productivity would have been better, or would there have been no ideas? I don't know.
I did every byte of code, every graphic, every sound, every single thing that is in Yar's Revenge. I did myself, with the exception of the 6-character kernel, which was a standard piece of code we all used to use to put up a score thing, only I used it to print a little text and do some readout stuff.
Less game design was required back then, and we could get away with, during the garage days of making games, less design was needed. You could just, hey, all of a sudden we need lasers on this thing. Okay, let's put them on. Hey, it works. You can't do that nowadays. You have to make people stay over the weekend to put those lasers on. When we started to Image Excel, doing Quarantine, it was more of that was like a basement operation. When I was working in that Alien Fires game in '86, it was the same kind of thing. It was there was 2 guys in a basement, and you know, we just put a game together, and it was you can get away with that, but you can't do it nowadays because of the complexity of the game.
Games really grew up out of a lot of small companies, people that were a little geeky and hobbyists and passionate about working with computers and making games, technologists.
Back in the day, you know, if I wanted something to happen in the game, I did it. I did it right then. I got immediate gratification, immediate feedback. I saw it. If it was good, it stayed. If it was bad, it was gone. Now, if you want to put something in the game, you've got to consult a design team. You've got to get something written into the spec. You've got to, you know, coax some programmers who may or may not be interested in the idea to do what's necessary to do to bring the idea together. You need art sometimes to coordinate with it.
Things are so sophisticated now, you have to have specialization in all the areas. You have to have AI, you have to have networking, you have to have graphics, you got to have designers and specialties, RPG designer, you know, story guy, writer.
And it's a much bigger operation to bring a change together. Plus there's enormous schedule pressure. People want the game done at a certain time. So if you want to change something, even if it might be a big enhancement to the game, the threat of, oh my God, you might miss the schedule, has a lot more power than it used to.
Death has appeared.
You got to have all these specializations now on a team, and that just means that one guy gets to do this one thing. It's not like him getting to do the whole thing. You know, the people that really get that kind of, you know, that kind of fulfillment are the leads on a team. And so, you know, it's still specialized, and so it's one guy getting to do just a little bit of stuff. And so that's definitely not as fulfilling as getting to do an entire game yourself. Like Gauntlet for me was way less fulfilling than anything that I'd ever worked on, because even though I did some programming and some level design on it, there's a ton of people working on this thing. There's like 50 in the Ukraine doing the art. And internally we had like 30 or something. So it was like 80 people on the team. And even though I was like came up with the idea and was directing and stuff like that, it was like, yeah, I didn't really make much in here. The team made it. That's great. Yeah, we're all a cool team making this fun game. But it's like each person doing just a little bit of stuff.
I mean, it's insanity. I mean, Hollywood has taken over video games, and you've got, instead of 2 or 3 people, maybe an artist, a programmer, and somebody a sound guy or something. Now you have 40 people, teams, specialists. There's soundtrack composers, sound effects guys, Foley artists. There's speech guys. There's probably 6 or 7 specialties in sound. There's, in video, in art, there are animators, shaders, modelers, level designers, character designers, guys who just do shoelaces on football players, guys who do shaders on shoelaces on football players. It's just, guys that just do zits on the faces of football players. And it's so specialized. It's become kind of like the Disney studio model, where you just have an army of people who are at such low levels. It kind of, I think, destroys the dream. There's so many sweat jobs, so many lower level jobs. And there's, at the top of this pyramid, there's like some Walt Disney guy who is commanding this incredible army of slaves to, like, you know what? I don't like zits. So like the last 6 months that you spent on zits, it's over. Now it's like, beard stubble.
And the funny thing is that there's almost no one who's really in charge. It's so diffused and so disseminated that it's hard to find that special ownership, and yet people still want to crack the whip and get every last bit out of you.
I think that's what keeps people going. They go, yeah, I'm doing shoelaces this week, but 2 years from now, I'm going to be on top. I'm going to be the lead producer. I'm going to be heading, driving the Titanic with my own army of slaves.
It's not all bad, The other difference between games now and games then is games now are so incredibly better technically than they used to be.
Every time the computing power grows by a factor of 10 or 50, it's tempting to want to use all of that power and build much more and much bigger assets and have much more complex and sophisticated programs using those assets.
We moved from the blocky paddles of Pong to 8-bit and 16-bit games and richer graphics, and now 3D games and higher polygon count and denser textures and bit mapping and shadows and particle effects and all these other things that are happening in games now.
And now we're going from 3D to high definition with incredibly real worlds, with all kinds of muscle simulation, physics simulation, dynamic stuff like eye tracking and speech creation.
The fact that early games were almost all single player, 2 people sitting in front of a television screen, and now online communication is becoming an important part of a lot of games.
There's a sniper or something around here, Dylan, because he's fucking tagging me out fast.
Massively multiplayer online role-playing worlds that people are in. I think that that's going to continue. I think that the social aspect of games, the communicative aspect, is going to continue to play an important role.
There's a over 1 million things that the average individual has learned in their life. How do we package that into one character in a game? Seems impossible, but at some point someone's going to achieve something like it, and that will again drive games forwards.
In the future, you'll play games with your mind.
Team sizes just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so it's not uncommon now to have teams that have over 100 people on them, and that's even just focusing on one platform.
You can only take so much risk when you've got $5 million to invest in something and you need a return.
It's just like Hollywood, you know. It's like people are always going, man, they never make independent movies, you know. It's all the same old crap, you know. Bruce Willis, you know, Die Hard 38, and the black guy and the white guy, and the cool chick, the Jiggly Show, and the Charlie's Angels. That when you're putting down 10 or 20 million to do a game, you know, you do become somewhat risk adverse.
It starts to make a lot more sense to put Spider-Man 7 on the shelf instead of inventing some radically new thing, and that's kind of tragic. It's a different kind of hit making. That's more of the blockbuster mentality around trying to make a hit theatrical film like Spider-Man or a hit video game like Spider-Man, and you see everybody dealing with the financial risk by retreating to established brands from another medium or sequels.
Follow the arrow to the van. This is pretty fast for a family van. What kind of mileage you get?
Back in the day, it was 2 guys in a garage working for 6 months. It's like, okay, let's design a whole new game, this thing called Tetris or something. And so it was a low investment. So I think as the money gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the risk aversion sets in.
It used to be innovate, create something new, and make a runaway hit. That used to be the dominant mode of thought, but it was a lot less money to take that chance then than it is now.
It's all about, you know, the branding, the marketing, you know, it's like, it's not, you know, it's not like just some guy killing people. It's, you know, it's 50 Cent killing people, you know? That's cool.
It was just another night when I got an urgent page from K-Dog, a major crack hustler I knew since juvie.
50 Cent, the hardest motherfucker on the streets. A lot of niggas found that out the hard way.
Marketing has totally dominated the thrust of what will and what ought to be done. It started off in the beginning, engineering just did games, and then marketing was given the games and they would sell the games. And now marketing is very, very involved, if not exclusively involved, in determining what the game will be.
Today, Electronic Arts is perhaps best known for games based on property licenses, but that was not the way it was in the beginning. In fact, I thought Hollywood was much too greedy about the terms that they wanted, and I felt it was much more important for Electronic Arts initially to be sponsoring creativity and originality in developing new ideas for this new platform of the computer. I didn't want to just turn it into a second-rate platform for properties from, say, the movie theater. And you can even see that reflected in how I built up the sports business that turned into EA Sports, because in the very beginning, I didn't go to a league and make a deal with a league, as you would see today. I again thought they were going to want too much money, and they of course did, or that they would just reject it completely because we weren't very important. So instead what I did initially was I went to individual athletes. Started with Julius Erving, and I just thought it made natural sense to try to create a one-on-one game pitting him against Larry Bird, because they were arch rivals and they sort of represented, they have embodied cultural archetypes and different styles of play. And I knew that from a technology standpoint, we really couldn't move around more than about 2 characters in animation anyway.
Luckily, there's a few guys like Will Wright, you know, who's kind of out there, who just writes his own check, and you know, he says, EA, hey, you know, I need 100 guys, I need 3 years, don't ask me what I'm doing, you know, fuck off, you know, you know, I'm gonna do something new. very, unfortunately there's very few guys with that kind of credibility, that kind of checkbook to pull that off. But I think there's a lot of independent game development out there. We don't see it here at E3, but you can explore it on the web. You can see it in the student community. There's like the Independent Games Festival, a lot of that stuff, and there you can see some of the more whacked out, more interesting ideas.
Giddy up. Hello, sheep. All right. Howdy.
Although it's still very hard for them to have the same level of fit and finish, so it's hard to, you see a game, everything's just a cube. Maybe it's the most amazing game in the world, but you just look at it, hey, it's just a bunch of cubes, screw it, I want to see, chicks with big tits, I don't want to see cubes, and they got to be well shaded with, the physics of the jiggle has to be just right, and all that stuff.
Hey, come on! Get ready, fly!
So it's those production values that kind of work against the innovation. It's like so often, sadly, the consumer is swayed by, the eye candy as opposed to the, some of the game play element and the innovation in that area.
The game industry, in that sense, is the retail game industry is pushing more and more towards a Hollywood model where it's more formulaic, more genre-fied, and the publishers is really, from a mercenary business point of view, why should they experiment with something else?
Certain things work. Certain genres they make sense. People want to play them.
There's the action movie, there's the love story, there's the racing tension picture and stuff. Same with the games. You have your platform games, you have your shoot 'em ups, and now you have your world, your cohesive world, simultaneous scenario type games.
So they need their team sports game and their racing game and their over-the-shoulder adventure game and their their fighting game or their big buxom heroine action slut.
What would give you that idea? Ascending.
In some ways, that's the price of success, is that these things now work and now we're doing the same kind of genre with new graphics or new characters or, it's still a comedy, still a situation comedy, except it's not Bob Newhart, it's Seinfeld,
When you want to do something new, that scares everyone who makes, financial decisions because new equals risk and risk is bad. Okay, so to have a breakaway hit, you have to do something new. And what I've found is that in a lot of places they're looking for a breakaway hit that's the same thing people have been doing for a long time. I've actually had people say that to me. We're looking for the big hit, but we just want to do the same thing we've been doing for the last 5 years. So I lay this whole design out of how we're going to do this and where it's going to go, and this is what it's going to be, and here's what's represented. So I'm really happy. I think I've really worked something out with all this. And Spielberg, after I'm done, looks at me, he goes, "Can't you do something like Pac-Man?" And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I was hearing this out of Steven Spielberg. I wanted to say to him, well, Poltergeist, couldn't you have done something more like Close Encounters? I just couldn't believe that he was going to say, well, couldn't you do more of a knockoff?
And the Game Developer's Choice Award for audio goes to...
Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm the audio guy. I want to do that.
No, you did the design one.
I want to do the audio one, dude.
No, okay. Okay. The Game Designers, the Game Developers Choice Award for audio goes to C. Paul Johnson, Marty O'Donnell, Jay Wineland for Halo 2.
Yeah.
I want to also thank the other people that we had working with us this year, Nile Rogers, my writing partner, Mike Salvatore, Stan Lepard, who did orchestrations. We had outside contractors working for us that did just a spectacular job. And I also, of course, want to thank my wife, Marcy, for not leaving me during another Halo crunch, 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 Halo crunch.
When the managers went in to interview people, it was, what's the enthusiasm level there? What's the enthusiasm for designing games? Yeah. I was interviewing one person before we sat down. He said, "Is it as much fun to work here as I think it is?"
to go to school, take a couple of courses in programming, and then go find a job as a programmer, that's not that hard. So you've got to think that there's all these people out there who want to be in entertainment, okay? And a lot of them are nerds.
I'm definitely a game geek. I mean, I grew up playing all kinds of games, console, arcade, computer games, and I still spend a lot of time playing games.
The industry preys on the young and helpless and nubile. And they tend to...
Speaking of nubile, how come there's no chicks in video games?
Girls don't work in video games because they don't apply for the jobs.
Oh,
They're
okay.
just job applications, female employees. We get more she-male employees than female employees. Seriously. Lots of she-males work in video games.
The number one job that, you know, teenage boys, you know, what they want to be is a game designer, right? Game designer, rock star, gangster.
Actually, you know, a lot of them, it isn't really a total rock star thing. It's just, they don't want to be the star. They just want to be there, and they want people to know they're there. It's you know, it's both beautiful and sad.
Games that are being made today, in large part, derives from the fact that games are being made by and for gamers, and they don't have rich lives outside of games. They're not doing other things. They're not exploring other interests. They're not climbing mountains or reading books or making films or building robots on the side or whatever it is that they want to do.
Most developers are 20-somethings, don't have kids. Many of them don't have girlfriends, right? So working long hours has never, for many developers, doesn't really seem like that much of a problem, at least until you've done it for 5 years. And then you kind of wake up, look around, and realize you have no life.
There are a not insignificant number of people who are in this business to avoid the rest of their life. So giving up the rest of their life isn't a big problem. It's actually a goal.
You know, you don't get too many people over 30 in games, like most people burn out. And people told me that when I was 20, that, you know, you're going to burn out by the time you're 30. I was like, nah, no. And I made it to 33, so I did okay. But I think it's just...
How many years was that?
I was in video games. Well, I hate to count the 80s stuff because I did one game and then I went to college and then started in 92, 93, that kind of time. So I like to say 10 years I was in it. Roughly 10 years.
You burnt out in 10 years. That's faster than any other industry can do that to you.
Well,
Including working
deep sea welding is pretty stressful, I hear.
Is it? Air traffic?
Air traffic, yeah.
Air traffic.
It's just as important as air traffic control.
I think once you've worked in video games, you can never work a normal job again.
I think, you know, labor issues and working conditions and sort of extreme hours and stuff is not unique to the game industry. Amongst all developers, there's this sense of sort of bravado that, you know, if you can't keep up, you know, if you can't work the crunch, then you don't deserve to be here. You know, it's like a badge of honor that, I mean, literally people brag saying, I didn't go home for 4 nights and I drank, 15 gallons of, coffee.
Once again, I was living on the Japanese developers' diet of chips, pizza, and the rice balls, and walking through the night from their offices. It was possible to see Mount Fuji, which many say is most impressive if you are willing to wake up and see it at dawn. We at HAL would see the sun shining on the mountain before we ever went to bed.
There's a heroization of the long hours, of the working all night and sleeping at your desk and waking up a few hours later and starting programming again. So that's embedded in the culture too. And that's part of the response of, well, that's just the way it is quit your whining. If you don't want to work this hard, go work in another industry.
Every guy's complaining, man, my job sucks, I work, 27 hours a day, and shit, they only paid me, 80 grand last year. This sucks. There's 28 guys standing behind you to take your job, And then behind those guys, there's, 300 million guys in China and another 100 million guys in India that would love to be working your job for, a tenth the money. If all the pixel pushers went on strike, the next day they would just, hire 1 million new guys and, you'd be gone.
When I signed up at 3DO, when I signed for work, the offer letter that I got stated explicitly in it that you will regularly be expected to work on weekends, and that if your project is getting into a crunch time or getting into a critical phase, you can be required to cancel vacations and trips to stay there, no pun intended.
Yeah, well, obviously there's a law there that's being broken. For example, we're very clear here, if we hire people and they're going to be working more than 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week, we tell them in advance, this is what the job is, this is what the expectations are, this is what the compensation is, so they know what they're getting into.
My fiance had gotten a job with them and went to work up in EALA, and they asked him in the interview, what do you think about long hours? He says, well, when they're necessary. And we had seen a lot of that all through Taldron and everything. It's just part of the way things work.
So this was nothing new for a question to be asked?
No, well, it's a little bit strange coming from an HR person from a big company because, the ideal perception is that a company like that, they shouldn't have to run like a small studio. They're not, running on a wire and the whole fate of the company is depending on the success of one title. They had so many titles that you like to think they're balancing out, they're figuring out a way to do this smarter. So it was a little out of left field, but, we're used to it. So he said, so long as it's reasonable, so long as it's necessary. And the day after he started, they went into crunch.
That EA spouse thing was like completely true all over the place in a lot of different companies. And it was funny because that was a definite reflection on an organization that's really big with a lot of people in it.
An easy week is 50, 55, maybe 60 hours, and 70, 80-hour weeks were required in a lot of cases for a lot of the project. And the way they schedule things nowadays, it means, usually you think a crunch time is just a little bit at the end of the project, but their crunch time would start about 20% into the project. So 80% of your project is crunch because you're so squeezed.
The most amount of consecutive hours I've ever worked in my entire life was at Monkey Stone. I worked 90 hours, and that was just insanity. But but it was like that whole thing was fun, and I wanted to work those hours. It was super fun. It was totally pushing myself, and it was great, But it's not like I would never do that at EA. I wouldn't do that if it's not my company and my game.
I know many people who do work there, have worked there, but most people who I have talked to who have worked at EA are not as happy working at EA as they have been at other places.
They do call it mandatory overtime, or they did send out mails saying you have to work on this Saturday, or you have to work this Sunday, or you have to work this certain holiday. You work somebody after 8 hours, especially doing, I think programmers especially, you actually become counterproductive. You start putting in code that you start putting stuff into the code that actually can damage your previous work. The productive 8 hours can be damaged by the following 4 hours.
EA normally sees a curve of bug production, of errors, and most people see this. And as the project gets closer and closer, as they start really pushing hard, the bugs go up. And it's actually kind of an exponential curve.
The problem is that, this is related to the credit thing, is that many of the executives in the industry view talent as interchangeable, or rather a commodity. They don't think that the people who create the game are the reason for the game's success. They think it's because, well, it's their brand, it's their resources, and if I burn you out, it's okay, because there's 10 other guys and girls lined up outside who'll take your place.
What mostly fuels the fear is that everybody knows that there are 16 college kids standing outside the door ready to take their job if they make any waves.
And whatever investment I put in you is, it doesn't matter, because you're a commodity. Next one in line, drive them, burn them into the ground, burn them out in 2 years. Next in line, take your place. And so with that kind of mentality, why should they be looking at the numbers? Why should they care? It's just sort of an exhaustible resource.
Because it's gotten to a point where it's not a personal endeavor just for yourself, right? It's a person who's just specialized doing a job for this other company, right? This company wants them to do something, and they're doing it for a salary. It's not like them and their game, and they're doing it for themselves, and they'll bleed to do this thing. That doesn't exist anymore right now. Maybe in mobile, and maybe on GBA or some handheld stuff, but not really in these big, huge production teams. It's like, I'm a cog and I'm working on this. And I know I am, and I'm just going to do my job, and I want my money, and if I work longer, I want more money.
Virtually every four-year college or junior college now is trying to do something with games, one way or another. With all of those students coming out, those are people that will work insane hours. They will work overtime. They will give up their lives to get a foot in the door and get their first job in the industry. And if you leave your job, that's who might fill it.
A lot of the problem is that those students are standing outside the door and waiting, and I can sympathize with them because I've been there. But there's a point at which you need to look further. You need to look further than yourself.
Workers, developers still kind of go into it saying, I'm so passionate, I love games, I'm going to give it my all. But there's not really that sense of, if I do so, I'm going to be rewarded accordingly. Rather, what we hear from many of the big companies is, your reward is you get to keep your job.
Bottom line is, yeah, they cut the bonuses for employees, and it was obviously, just to make some more money, right?
So you're contradicting your theories about working hard and receiving bonuses. So was it not a heavy crunch period?
That was during the middle of a huge crunch period, now that I think of it. So yeah, we got screwed on some bonuses. You'd like that. And I think and this came out in the EA spouse thing for people who I've heard this at multiple companies I work for. They're always have management. At some point is always when they get upset at the employees for speaking out about things. They always come out with the same thing. They always say, "Well, you're welcome to go somewhere else."
Back then, nobody said anything about how long you should work, and people were there all the time. All the time. Nowadays, people are there all the time because there are managers who are saying, if you are not here all the time, you'll be fired. That's a different take on people's motivation.
That was policy. I mean, it was something that came down from the top, and they said, these are the hours you're going to work, or we'll fire you. And they did. There was a guy that they let go because he refused to work the hours.
So what's your take on when a manager will say, well, if you're not going to work 80 hours and work Saturday and Sunday, you're fired without cause?
I mean, that's brutal. I guess we have a joke. The joke around the industry is the manager from hell comes in your office and goes, well, if you're not going to make it in Saturday, don't bother coming in Sunday. And it's a sad aspect of the business that you have to almost give up your life.
Not only do they not get paid overtime more often than not, but in many cases, the large companies actually sort of hide their talent because they don't want me to be famous, they want the company to be famous. They don't want the gamers to know that it was my idea and my design, or me and my team. They want it to be that the studio is responsible for this great creation. You look at any other entertainment-based industry, books, movies, music. Nobody cares who prints Stephen King's book. They want to read Stephen King. He's the talent, he's the creative mind. Same thing with music. I want to listen to U2. I don't care who pressed the CD or who did their mark. It's worthless. I want the end result. I want the content. And that's not happening in the game industry. The game industry, the companies are sort of hoarding the credit. The companies are hoarding the recognition because they don't want the talent to be portable.
There's not enough strong designers that really will stand up to management and stand behind their idea and fight for it, and understand that if you're at a company that's just messing up what you're working on, go find another company. There's tons, come knock on my door. There's plenty of people that will hire you. We want people that are that really believe in what they're doing and believe in their vision.
Mismanagement or lack of management training is one of the core issues or root issues behind poor working conditions with the industry.
If you're running a large company like that, you must know something about management of even basic high school course management stuff. I'm sure you at least know that there's some kind of structure to a company. Managers, you know, they never really, at least when I was there were no managers for anything. And like even not a true lead programmer in the programming department. There was not one lead that they went to and who disseminated the tasks to the rest of the department. Right, and it's this is pretty basic stuff in the rest of the world.
It's kind of a free-for-all, you know. I don't know where they recruit their. I think it's like the movie industry. It's like people you know, and that's how people are recruited. But I've worked with 2 managers here who were very qualified. 2 or I don't remember.
20?
So we had. Well, it depends on like. I know that there's 2 people in that building who are qualified to be in management. 2, really good, strong, good guys. 2 of them.
Should be in politics, man.
They're really good.
Yeah.
The other, yeah. I mean, you know, management at EA it's all over the map.
You have artists working on art, you have designers making the story in the background, so the gameplay mechanics, you have the programmers doing the code, you have the musicians making the music, and everyone's kind of working on their own thing, and at some point it all comes together. When it comes together, more often than not, it sucks.
I guess it's all about, you know, taking, 20 pounds of shit and putting it in a 5-pound box. It's amazing how everybody wants to make the game so cool, and so you never can define everything up front. As much as you want to define all these scripts and stuff, in the process of designing a game, you find things that you never thought of. Playing it for the first time, you find what's cool, what isn't cool, and so you always end up trying to add more, trying to figure out what really is cool about the game, and then you're adding more, you're stuffing more into the project that isn't on the schedule, never was there, and everybody's doing it.
When is enough enough? Let's say you're producing a AAA game, you can keep polishing it for months. There's no end to it. And how do you control the level of quality? When do you get that AAA? And can you stop there? Can you be disciplined enough to stop at that time? I think ambitions are not just from management, they're also from the employees themselves. Out of control ambitions and feature creep are something that we feel all the communication systems that we've put in place right now don't resolve that situation.
We do. I mean, we've learned over the years. We used to slip and slide and add more features. I'm the biggest culprit, to be honest. I'm the one that's like, it would be really cool if we added this. And the team's like, oh, you're the president, so I guess we have to. And so, I'm Mr. Feature Creep. So the important thing is to have production able to stand up against me and say, will you
it's
please,
discipline,
you're
by
not
the way.
invited to this meeting.
You run against this, ship date, but it's like you want the game to sell, you want it to be cool, you want it to be everything you can make it, and so you're just cramming all this stuff into, what were 40-hour weeks, they become 120-hour weeks.
In the game industry, what happens is, and I suppose it's partially to do with the managers who don't have the right training, is that they start day one. They say, okay, let's all go off and do our stuff, and let's come back 6 months from now, once we've got enough stuff done, put it together and see where we are. Now, if you were thinking you were going to ship at the end of the year, and when you put it together it sucked, well, you literally have to redo almost 6 months of work. Well, now you're delayed by 6 months, and it's like, holy crap, well, what do we do to catch up? Well, we'll work double shifts.
In certain studios, it does seem like crunch is permanent. But the job of a good producer is to ensure that the crunch is 6 weeks, not 6 months, or God help us, 6 years.
You're not allowed to ask them to stay late.
No, I found that out later. I think early on I would ask people to stay late. Even though I wanted them to go home, I'm like, you're going to have to stay a little late. I try to avoid it at any time. I try to get people to do anything I could ahead of time. But there'd always be this big thing that happened at 4:49, 4:59 p.m. and it was always a huge thing that had to be done that night. And most times it wasn't. It was always some big dud or There was some build that had to go out, but it ended up getting delayed till the next day. Sometimes there are all-nighters that were fun, and people voluntarily wanted to just get this thing done. That's a different thing. I think you must get that in...
No, that's the wrong attitude right there. All-nighters are not fun. I don't know how any all-nighter could have been fun.
There was one.
Yeah, so you got all these sort of pressures. So now essentially, you have the business pressures and the executives on the top pushing down. You have the sort of the elusiveness of fun and the challenges of creating an iterative project on the bottom, and then you have the managers in the middle, the project managers, who are clueless. So I mean, that's like a ticking time bomb for disaster.
It's still being run by the same people that have no management training or experience. I think there's so little experience outside of the video game industry that we really don't see how a real company is run.
The industry is it's a young industry. It has a lot of problems and that kind of thing, but this sort of corporate level abuse and running things as a bad small studio on this epic level, and they're doing it to everyone.
Nobody wants to say, no, we can't do it. That's the other thing in the entertainment industry is the phrase, yeah, we could do that. You hear that more in the entertainment industry than anywhere else. I've been in and out of the entertainment industry, and that's the biggest difference. When I am in the entertainment industry, I hear the phrase, yeah, we could do that. Oh, we could do that, and that would be cool. You know, outside of the entertainment industry, I hear, nah, that's not wise to plan that way. That's not really going to happen. We need to make it, because outside the entertainment industry, you don't have a Christmas release.
Well, I always felt like we were at war with our own companies. Like, why are we making a demo for our own company? It doesn't make sense in any other company, I don't think. Maybe in big companies like IBM or something like that, but...
When you're milestone driven, you want to show your investor, yes.
Investor, yeah, but not show your boss something.
Is there an internal
like, why are we...
division?
And why does the producer want us to produce something to make our game look better than it really is?
In the entertainment industry, you release this Christmas, you're fresh. You wait till next Christmas, you're stale. And nobody sells anything in January and February and March and April. It's like, and I'm kind of used to that rhythm. I get up for it, and I'm one of those people who goes, yeah, we could do that. You know, that's how you wind up doing a game in 5 weeks and having the worst game of all time. Yeah, I can do that.
There seems to be no hope in sight. Like, it's just getting worse and worse, and the amount of planning is less.
I'm sort of seeing two strategies and two things happening. One is consolidation, where the big companies are getting bigger. You know, now it's not 200 people, we need 300 people, we need 400 people. Let's go buy this studio, let's go hire all these people, let's go, and sort of let's hire all these students and, you know, balloon, get bigger and bigger and bigger, so everything's all there under one roof. For the most part, that has succeeded, but we have ended up in a situation where the working conditions are pretty extreme or sort of sweatshop-like. The other kind of, on the complete other end of the spectrum, we're seeing sort of an explosion. So you'll have, you know, a group of artists that kind of go around from project to project, or a group of programmers that go around from project to, or, you know, they get hired on a contract per contract basis. You know, you have a designer that, you know, operates as a freelancer, and it's going to follow almost what we see in Hollywood in terms of like a Hollywood production.
A lot of people in the games industry really wish they were working for Hollywood, and the industry has this kind of colonial cringe towards Hollywood.
I know it seems odd that the movie industry and the game industry seem very similar on some levels, and yet the labor is much more organized in film. Film has been around much, much longer.
The movie industry, in a way, it's very simple what you're doing. You're making an image on film, and it's all about the schedule. And the game industry is much different. It's still a young industry, and they're still figuring out how to schedule this.
The games industry is still like in Keystone Cops movie mode, where they could get away with stuff. They actually used to throw children in the dumpster when they were making Keystone Cops, I think. That's the era we're in video games. We're only a few years into it, I guess.
From a management point of view, to operate it very much like the film industry, but the labor is young enough that it hasn't become sophisticated enough to behave as the film industry labor has, okay? And what I mean by that is, you know, the main difference you're talking about is unions, okay? You know, film is unionized, and those people have plans, they have protection, they have this, they have that, blah, 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 and in video games, there's no unions, and you have a thing where by the way, we expect you to work 78 hours a week.
if everybody unionized and worked a 40-hour week, they'd fire everyone and move it to India or China or some other place where the, people would love to have your job, you know, and they don't even have to because there's 10 guys behind you that want your job here.
In some ways, you know, is it a business that can only succeed in an insane way? I don't know. There's some evidence to support that.
It may result in just offshoring the game development. You know, I think that could be, you know, the sad result of, you know, a well-intentioned people, well-intentioned wanting to, you know, have their rights as their human rights or whatever. They may find that, you know, they'll have their human rights, and then their right to be unemployed will be fully exercised. So, you know, that's the sad part of it all, is it may just create an environment that's hostile for game development in this country, and that would be a sad day. So it's amazing how well-meaning, often well-meaning, well-thought efforts, you know, kind of create things that are unexpected and you know.
So your message to these people is that beware, because you'll all lose your jobs because you're just going to offshore?
Yeah, if you're just a crybaby, you know, everybody, spanking. You know, exactly. Crybabies are going to get their spanking, you know, and you know, you got to love it, you know, because you got to love the game, and because there's a lot of people out there that love games too, you know, and so if you're not in it for the love, then you're probably not going to be in it for long.